spent a long number of years working with traditional cultures in parts of the Western Pacific, particularly Vanuatu. I've learned more from them that is really of world importance than I did in all my 11 years at university in England. And some of those years were at Oxford and Cambridge. Interesting cultures, interesting tribes. Not as open as certain Pacific cultures. What it is that all of these academic disciplines have been working on, or in, or with the Pacific for 100 years. But they haven't learned anything. They haven't learned anything. They've been using the Pacific as a sort of a territory that they can mine for their own academic purposes, that they can get their own benefits from. But actually learning anything from the Pacific, from the cultures there, they haven't learned anything. It hasn't changed their ways of thinking, it hasn't changed their ways of thought. And all of this attempts to ban kava in various forms, either in Australia or in Europe or in the US, is just a continuation of 19th century type missionary prohibition ideas or colonialization. Right, the indigenous people, they have to go to school, they have to wash regularly, they have to get jobs, they have to become Christian. I mean, the world has gone beyond that. You know, Pacific Islanders they have a right to continue their own cultures, their own way of life, their own way of thinking, in whatever way they want to do it today, and they have a right to be respected. The Pacific Island culture and their culture doesn't just exist for tourists to go to or for white people to do research projects in and get massive grants to do research projects in. Pacific Islands and Islanders and their cultures need to be respected. And kava is one of the things that is critical to many aspects of many of the cultures in parts of the Pacific. And what the white man's world has been trying to do is take kava out of its ancient and profound cultural and social context and take it into the white man's world where everything is done by different types of laws, which in the Pacific, people don't respect white man's laws because most of them are just based on false stuff in a completely different series of worlds that are not necessarily relevant for Pacific cultures. The white man is trying to ban culture based on a series of concepts that are based on white man's law that ignore the realities of life in the Pacific. They're banning it for the wrong reasons, where if they really want to ban stuff for particular reasons, they should actually try and ban things that are harmful. And kava is not harmful. People complain about the fact that maybe in Australia, maybe there's a problem with a certain percentage of Pacific Island youth who all seem to be in trouble. But if alcohol is the only thing they've got to relax with, then of course they're going to be violent. You know, with kava, it's a pacifier. You cannot be violent, you cannot even think violently. If Pacific Islanders in the Pacific or wherever else they're living, if they're completely taken away from their cultures and their ways of respect, then who knows what's going to happen. If you ban kava, there is no reason on earth to ban kava. You know.
What would happen if they do ban kava?
Well, if they do ban kava, if Pacific Islanders, if you had no kava in the Pacific, certain areas of the Pacific that are kava drinking nations would become much more violent. If the only thing they had was access to white man's alcohol, those nations would become much, much more violent. Kava is a pacifier. It's the best natural remedy there is for treating anxiety, stress, and tension, and relaxing. But the problem is, because the white man's world is only interested in their real God, which is money, they are trying to take kava out of its profound cultural context into a world where they can make money out of it. And by doing that, they're messing it up. And they're trying to fiddle around with it. And because a lot of these things are to do with money, what the white man's world wants to do is to find out what it is in kava that makes it work so well. It's more for relieving anxiety, stress, and tension. It's more effective than Prozac. I mean, there are Dutch medical studies that have proven that. But of course, big pharmaceutical companies overseas, they don't want something that is natural and in the outer islands is actually free to compete with something that white white man's companies can make millions of dollars or billions of dollars out of. Huh? But the white man's world hasn't been able to actually yet find out exactly what it is in that very complex mixture of chemicals in kava that really makes it work. Because the things that the white man think make it work will, in the traditional way of looking at things, only work if they are in conjunction with other things. The mistake the white man's world always makes is they will try and take out the elements that they think makes it work and then mix it with some other things to make it work more effectively. By doing so, they mess it up, you know, because they don't understand the way real natural medicines work. They're into a quick fix. This is where the white man's world has made its mistake.